I'm Jim Clark, Visual Arts Manager here at Hopkins Center for the Arts. We're speaking with Nathan Stromberg about his exhibition, Recollection, on view in the first floor lobby gallery through June 21st, 2025. Nathan, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks
for being here.
Yeah, anytime anybody wants to ask me about my work, I'm thrilled. I spent so much time making it. It's great to talk about.
Wait until you hear the questions.
Let's go. Let's go.
Tell us about the specific, if there is a specific inspiration for this body of work.
The work here is largely the product of experimentation and revision for the last 15 or 16 years since I put my paints away and decided to apply what I know about paint to collage. And this most recent work, I feel like I've been dealing a lot with memory, especially the memories around objects or the associated memories, the things we think we remember or maybe we don't, how our memories sometimes don't paint the most accurate picture of things. And I kept circling around the word recollection in order to think back on the past, but also recollection as a play on the word to think about, re-representing it, putting it back out there. And so that's how I'm classifying this body of work, and it's very much ongoing, and it's something that, every piece I make, I feel like I'm just trying to hone these ideas further, figure new things out about what I can say, and push the medium further.
Sure. So you started as a painter?
Yeah, I have a background in oil painting from my master's work, and largely something that I do not dislike painting at all. I love to paint. But I wanted to try to find a unique angle on something, a way that I could do something with my art that maybe isn't seen as often. I really do believe that most ideas in art have kind of been tackled in one way or another. And I know there are amazing artists out there who do what I do, who call themselves collage painters, who apply, try to make realistic things out of collage. But I adore the challenge of trying to figure out how to take one material and to repurpose it and to make it into something completely different, and reward the viewer when they maybe walk by. A common thing I hear about my work is that I thought that was a painting.
Yes.
And then get closer, and I know at the opening you said that to some people. You were like, no, go closer. And I love that. I love the challenge of trying to make paper work in that way.
Well, they're very painterly in your application. Like every cut paper element feels like a stroke of color. And even in the fields where, there's an object that's yellow, but there's all these yellows, and there's the yellow with a little green, and yellow with a little bit more red yellow. That enrich the surface. But you don't think of it in painterly terms. It's really collage for you.
Yeah, well, there's such a strange, when you're cutting out of a piece of paper and it has a bit of text or a bit of image on it, you're really limited by what you can do. So the exercise of treating collage paper like it's paint is really to see what will work and what won't, and then to keep refining it until it does work. One of the things that, and you can see it on some of the pieces in the frames a little more that haven't been resined over. The resin obviously protects it from fading, and we can talk more about materials, but there's, sometimes it's 12, to 20 layers of paper thick, and there actually are little shadows that are cast by the thickness of the paper, because you can obsess about it forever to try to find the perfect little bit, but the truth is you're never going to find it. And so what I do is I'll just take something, I'll say, okay, that looks like it might work, glue it down, and then step back and look at it, and either go over it with something else or maybe find something a little bit smaller and put that over top and let a little bit of that first piece shine through, and then just keep doing that until it has the look maybe of little brush strokes or the feelings of little bits, but that in those little bits there's little textures and images and the palettes of paper too. I try to use period papers whenever I can. So if I'm doing 70s, 60s images, I'm sourcing that from Good Housekeeping magazines from 1973, you know.
So it's important to you that the vintage of the material is appropriate to the vintage of the object being depicted.
I think so, yes. In the early going, I mean, this process is extremely slow. It takes so much time. And I'm a very patient person, but more I'm a very stubborn person in that I want to get it right. Yeah. And it started because around 2010, we ripped up our attic and to fix up the kids' room, and there was newspaper all over the inside of our walls from 41. And so I started making all these cars out of 1941 newspaper, but then it occurred to me, this is weird, I'm making like a 57 Chevy out of 1941, and I'm seeing all these little ads and bits that I'm like, this doesn't mesh, so what if I, found that paper? Mm-hmm. Turns out, with eBay and the internet, you can find a lot of this stuff. So
that's how you source primarily?
As much as I can. I mean, whenever anybody's throwing books out or doing those sort of things, I'm going to pick through them. I'm going to find as much as I can, without having to pay for it. But I have a lot. I have a lot of paper.
Do you accept donations?
I do.
I bet there are folks here that,
I have shown up, outside my classroom at school and had like boxes of moldy magazines on the ground, and thanks, appreciate it. There's a fine line between trash and treasure.
Yeah. And what can you define that line a little bit? Like when do you reject material?
Well, I guess no, I don't need any of your paper, thank you. unless you're offering me, some very special paper. No, I found out the hard way, again, through years and years of experimenting with this and trying to refine the process that, these old papers and these old inks were not meant to hold up to sunlight and to be out in the open or to even be in anything other than a closed magazine, They fall apart. I learned pretty quickly that bright blues turn gray and bright reds turn a pale orange, and so I have an innate knowledge now of how to actually, if I need something that's going to be gray, like make it a little more bright blue, and knowing that some of that will fade. But also, it's been a real challenge to figure out how to keep the color and to make that work. So one solution is to epoxy them and to use museum glass and lots of UV protectant spray, and another is to try to find better reproductions of that paper to source from. So my favorite place now is at Barnes & Noble, like the discount rack at Barnes & Noble, and if I find for example, a book on classic movie posters from the 1950s on sale for $9.99, and and I could cut that up, and it's on a much higher quality paper. So I do a lot of that as well. My studio is full of books that I'm cutting out of and old magazines, and usually if it's pieces that aren't as bright, I will use the magazines, and then the brighter bits are going to need to use the books for that. So.
My head is swimming thinking about as a painter and draftsman, I got enough stuff around, but how do you possibly organize your materials? Do you have boxes or drawers of, this color goes in here, like a palette of papers, or what does that look like?
I do have some bins, for oranges and reds and yellows, and but I'm not that organized. I mean, if you saw my studio space, your first reaction might be, oh no, what happened in here? It's chaos, but to me, I know where all those bits are, and so I usually only put the colors back when I'm cleaning my desktop after finishing a piece and I need to think, oh, that's a good purple bit. I might use that later. I'll put that in the purple bin. But otherwise, it's very much, kind of on the periphery as I'm working. Have pieces out, and it can be a little chaotic, but it's an organized chaos. At least to my brain, it is. So.
Is that a dissenting? Process-wise, do you have an idea of the objects that you're going to depict in a particular work from the get-go? Do you draw out a thumbnail? Do you work composition out?
I have to work out. This is not a good experimental medium because it takes so long. You don't want it like with painting. You can take a canvas and you can paint in an object, and if it doesn't work, you can gesso over it. Or you can work it into something else. That would be, these take months for me to make. So I meticulously plan it out. So I use the computer to make a digital collage version, a mock-up of the entire thing, and I'll play with the size of things and the spacing and all of that.
Okay.
And then I transfer that to draw that out on, in this case, a panel board or a piece of really thick paper that can take all that glue without curling, 400.
What is your choice of paper for that?
It's usually like a 400 pound, like Waterford, like it's a super thick, it's about the thickest watercolor paper that you can buy.
Okay.
Because it just is so thick it won't curl. Otherwise you have to turn it over and get the back wet all the time to make it go flat. But these are on it's like a 1/4 inch birch plywood. And then, I'll cut these ones where I've been busting the frame a little bit, cut them out with a jigsaw and mount them on a piece of 1 inch thick wood on the back that makes them hover off the wall like that. And then it's just look at the picture and here we go. And glue down, piece down, glue on top, and go until it feels done, which it never really does. It always feels like go until it reaches a decent point where I can say, okay, for now, that's good. Yeah. And
But after you apply the resin coating, there's really no going back into it?
Not really. I did a piece for a client commission this year where I had some problems with the resin and it soaked into some of the papers. I usually will lacquer it like just really, really thick with extra layers of the medium so that doesn't happen. And then it kind of stained some of the paper with these blotches, and so I ended up going back over top, and it might be something I work with, because when there's a little bit of a 1/8 gap, then now between these different layers, it creates little shadows in there, and that could be. It's something I'm toying with, but
Sure.
it's also a little bit scary because then you're having to think not only about making one image, but making subsequent images and building it out, getting closer to sculpture in a lot of ways. And,
Right.
It's cool. It's exciting. We'll see. So it could be something to try out.
When you made the jump from painting to collage work, were there other artists that you were looking at for inspiration, or was it remembering something from the past? You were like, oh, I did this one time, and I'm going to try this approach.
That was the impetus for working or jumping over to collage, you mean,
Yeah,
from painting?
yeah.
So I mentioned before that I had all this newspaper from our house, and I set it all aside. I kept way too much of it. I still have it, a lot of it, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It was such this cool treasure to find in your floor and your walls. And I, for a long time, thought with the painting, could I incorporate this into the painting somehow? So I was thinking a lot of Jasper Johns. I went to the Met and I saw his flags. And he uses encaustic, but if you get up close to the flag, there's little bits of the newspaper in there. And I thought, well, that could be really cool. And I made a whole image of a car out of newspaper, so the shadow of the car, it was like a monotone. So the shadows of the car, doing it with dark bits of newspaper and the lights corresponding, you get the idea. Made this really cool little picture of a car and then diluted my oil paints down and went over top. And it just immediately, I was like, oh no, it looked so much. That was much cooler without the paint. And so I put the paints away, and they haven't come out since. Now the challenge with that is it took me like a couple years of working only in monotone objects to figure out how to control the value of it, the dark and light of it. But to apply that to color means now you have to find this very specific cherry red, and you have to get a darker version of that very specific red and a lighter version of that red. So, the learning curve has been significant to figure that out. But I still do, to me in my brain, it does not feel detached from how I would approach a painting or putting color versus color and the excitement that gives. Or specifically with this new work, like I'm just really, really fascinated with not only the associated memories we have with objects and the importance of objects in our lives, but just, the fact that the round curve of this, echoes the roundness of that. And I don't expect everybody to understand that, but I do get excited about just the formal satisfaction of putting objects together in a way that might feel a little more confusing in terms of like, what do these objects have to do with each other? But they look really well together. Like a Triceratops skeleton and a cheeseburger. Those are two objects that just look really good next to each other to me. And I'm sorry, but I enjoy being the artist and being the one with the knife and the glue to be able to say, I want to put these two things together, and I want to see what that happens, because I don't know if I've seen that before. So,
And when you come up with those visual non sequiturs, I'll say, and maybe that's not apt, but you're juxtaposing things that don't have immediate associations, but for a general space of time and a certain design language that people were fluent in that space of time. But how do you select? I mean, are you looking through period magazines and looking for the bits that you're going to use, but the imagery that you're going to activate? And just trial and error, or there's a lightning bolt?
It's a great question. I just write stuff down all the time as it comes to me. Usually it's on little Post-it notes or little bits of paper, wedged into my pocket that my wife finds on the side of our dresser. Yeah, like I'll think of something that comes to me, like an object that comes to me, know. Or I see a commercial on TV or something, and I'll think, oh, I wonder if, and write that down, because it's going to be gone if you don't write it down. And then I have a big long list of this, and I over time on my computer I do quite a bit of research to try to find things that actually are of period vintage, because there's this weird thing now where you might be able to find, the Pyrex bowls or the old 70s folding chair. But then they're also remaking those things now, like to look old, and then to somebody who might know, they might be like, "Oh, that's not what it really was. Like that's the one you can get at Urban Outfitters that looks like the old thing." And so I actually do quite a bit of research into the objects, which who else is doing this? But to read about the history of these objects and to try to get to know them. And then on my computer, I just have I'll cut them out and isolate them digitally so that I can just sort of grab them and move them around and spin them upside down and turn them on and off to see what works. And so to answer your question, I have no idea when I start designing it, if it's going to look like this or not. Yeah. It's really, it's a turning on and off of like, okay, does that work? Does it not?
Trial and error?
Trial and error, I think, digitally first, of course, to figure it out in the digital sphere, and then make a collage from that. So in a sense, it's a collage of a collage. It's very much a multi-layered process that way. Yeah. And then the end result is something that, is hopefully different than other art you've seen, and maybe a little bit strange, but hopefully there's some humor, in the way that those things are put together too. And the more I've actually tried to think about, because it's not random to me, as I've thought about the way, as I'm getting older, I'm consciously aware now that I have memories of things that I think I remember that I probably don't. And a lot of that has to do with, you look at an old photograph and you realize over time, like, oh, I couldn't have possibly remembered that, but my brain's telling me that, or time is such a weird thing, that to remember a time before we had phones, is even hard to do now. So to think about, but yet our brains kind of rationalize it, right? Think about the things from when you were a kid in these different ways, and my brain is very nonlinear in that way. And I found that the more I was doing this, the more it seemed to sort of stoke my interest in why that is. And I don't have those answers, but I think my art is engaging with that.
Some viewers, when it was first installed, thought they were just blown up images from vintage magazines. They didn't realize they were made of, that they were collages. And part of that is getting up close and spending some time with it, because they're so objectively representational from distance. But one thing that I enjoy are these visual Easter eggs, because as you're looking at them, and most people are about at this distance, but then you get up close and you're finding things within it. Do you bury things intentionally to reward that sustained viewing, or is that just an incidental part of the collage aspect of them?
I definitely like to put all the little bits that reward a closer viewing, but to me it's not about, let's put the little, if there is something that is slightly humorous, or I don't want to have anything that's going to wreck somebody's interpretation of the piece. I don't want to have a bit of text that tells you exactly what, I like the ambiguity of it. So if I find a woman who's got a yellow shirt on and black hair, and it disguises itself in there, I get really excited about that, because it becomes this little bit where, oh, I got close, I could see that. Oftentimes, the last thing I do, because it usually is I'm working from bigger pieces to smaller pieces, and the end stages, I'm using the little scraps left over all over my desk, the tiny little scraps I've cut out of other things. But I'm oftentimes trying to use words, or sometimes even fragments of sentences, because they look a little bit like a texture, or they look a little bit like the shiny, edge of the chair, for example. And so I never want to find words that are super heavy-handed that way. But so I will try to find something that, out of context, is a little puzzling, but also maybe slightly humorous. That's kind of how I view it. I've done a little bit of that. These Beatles pieces right behind you. Combing through all these magazines for years, I had, especially all the 60s magazines, they're just full of Beatles pictures, okay, because how could they not be? And so I actually I was like, I'm just going to cut out every picture. Every time I see a Beatles picture, I'm just going to make a folder. And so I had a John, Paul, George, and a Ringo folder. And then with these, I wonder if I could apply that logic to it, right? To say, I'm going to make a Ringo piece of his drum set, but I'm going to make it completely out of the Ringo pieces. I fudged it a little bit there to get some of the other colors, but
don't tell anybody.
Very much what I did there. A couple years ago, I made a piece which has since sold, which was one of my favorites. I was also saving the cigarette ads from papers, because there's all these cigarette ads which are, 9 out of 10 doctors prefer Camels, this sort of thing. But I made a cigarette machine, one of those cigarette machines with all of the cigarette ads and, all the little sentences about, the benefits of smooth taste and low tar and doctor recommendations and all that. So yeah, to me, it's quite humorous, actually. I don't want to put a silly joke in there, but I love that it might shift the narrative somehow, or you get in really close and you see some words and think, oh, that's curious and clever. So
there's a line.
There is, absolutely. Yeah.
Have you ever felt like you finished a piece and then you were like, I kind of crossed my own line there?
Yeah, I could think of, yes. Yeah, I have.
You don't need to tell us exactly which one, but...
Okay.
But please do.
Yeah, no, I think like sometimes if I'm, just specifically like these are Pyrex bowls, which I grew up around my house. And if I would find, the word, sometimes you come across a yellow bowl that says Pyrex on it and you're like, oh, I could put that in there. And I've learned over the years, I don't need to do that. If I can find a little tiny bit of I'll cut half of the word off, so maybe it's kind of hidden more in there. But I don't like the idea of being super straightforward and heavy-handed about it if I don't have to be.
Sure. Suggest versus on the nose.
Correct. Yeah. Because I'm fully aware that people also have associations with these objects. It's one of the things I find most interesting when people talk to me about my work is oftentimes they'll say, oh, we had that chair, or it brings back a specific memory that they had, or we had that station wagon,
I was just looking at a photograph of in a chair. I was in this chair. Yeah. Is that what you're looking for? Do you expect anything of the viewer? Is there anything you want from the viewer?
Engagement. I'd like them to look close. I'd like them to be wowed by the fact that it's paper, and to maybe think about the material and just all the associations that we have with printed media and objects and all of it. And I love the fact that it can mean different things to different people. That's something I'm always trying to find that line. So.
Cool. You do commissions.
Yeah.
Right? And recently did a commission for Lucasfilm.
Yeah.
Can we speak about that?
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if that's not a crowning achievement, I mean.
Yeah. It was amazing. I got a call a year ago in January and said, would you like to make a big piece for our new offices for Lucasfilm in San Francisco, a Star Wars piece? And I, as a kid of the 80s, just, grew up on that and was completely obsessed with that. And so, applying the same logic, but this time finding, I went to Half Price Books and they have a whole shelf full of kids' Star Wars books. And, there's no shortage of Star Wars material out there. Even a lot of the magazines I had at home, had Star Wars pictures in them, and apply all that same logic, but in this case do it for, I made a big R2-D2 and C-3PO, and it was, it was incredibly cool. Felt in total imposter syndrome to go there where all these amazing artists, are making this visual language that, shaped my childhood. It was incredibly cool.
And they found you.
Yeah, I have a connection with someone who works there.
Okay.
And he happened to be in a meeting where somebody said, wouldn't it be cool if we have all this old material, wouldn't it be cool if we could find a way to repurpose this into some art somehow? And he put my Instagram up on the board, but that's how these things happen, Yeah. It happens because people, I've had the chance to do some cool commissions like that, and it's happened because people have said, I've seen this guy's work. I wonder if he could do something like that. So to anybody watching this, please find me. I love that. I'm not a total sellout, but
Not every commission is as cool as R2.
That is true.
And 3PO.
That is true.
Do you find commission work as engaging and inspiring when it's not pop culture that resonates with you? Yeah. Between doing your own personal work and following your personal muse and doing something for someone that's very cool, there's a broad range in there of things that you really want me to do that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
But
not all commissions are the same. And to answer the question, I think doing both is really healthy. You know, the time when I did the Star Wars piece, you know, I was a couple months into these pieces, and some of the pieces down at the end were part of that, the earlier deviation pieces that I did, and it was really refreshing to step away from it, and to apply that to something, you know, pop culture and very specific. And then there's been other times where I've done, you know, car portraits for people, and I'm just, it's like, I'm happy to do this, but I really want to be doing this, you know.
Yes.
So it's tricky. I think there's a fine line, and a lot of artists have to walk that line, you know. I'm thankful that I do teach, so my income is not dependent on my art. Otherwise, I'd probably be doing a lot of collages of cat portraits and things like that, you know. I'll do a cat portrait if the money's right, but yeah.
Do you find teaching, because you can't be teaching collage every day,
No,
and so you're engaging with many different mediums and many different approaches and technical.
Yeah.
So you keep your fingers in all of that and get away from this. Is that too beneficial?
I think in some respect it is helpful. I teach graphic design, ceramics, and sculpture are the main courses I teach. I also teach high school students who are creating portfolios for college applications and things like that. And that is, in a lot of ways, very similar, trying to have conversations like this about the intentionality of their work and what they want to do. So that is a great parallel. But even working with my hands in different ways, making ceramic work, making sculptures, and certainly doing graphic design work, it engages a different part of the brain. There are also days where I go home and I think, wow, if I could have given, you know, my full energy today to this, you know, I would have maybe made this piece a little faster. But no, it's all about balance creatively. I'm kind of obsessed with making stuff and exploring new ways of being creative, and so it all informs the next thing somehow, for sure. So.
How often do they turn out exactly like you imagined?
Never. I mean, if you could see the image that I made this from, you'd recognize it, but it would be very lifeless, you know? It's just a bunch of photos kind of put together that don't really look like they belong together. And yet, you know, because I've had to transform it using the paper, and because there are little tricks I do, you know, like your brain visually responds to repetition. So when you have, you know, a particular orange on one side and I use a little bit of that color on the other side, your brain can't help but like activate that space between those two bits, and you notice it, and you can make these things visually relate to each other and speak together through the creative process of making it. And so, yeah, I did a couple years ago, I had a solo exhibition, and the curator wrote up an article for a little gallery book, and I started telling him about, you know, the digital stuff, and he's like, can we see that, you know? And he actually put a little folder out, you know, so that people could like look through and see that. And I don't know how interesting that was to people, you know. I think the immediate response to seeing it is like, wow, that turned out a lot better. But to answer your question, I don't really know. I mean, like it always turns out way better than what I anticipate. But sometimes it takes a very different path, you know, and sometimes it ends up looking. Sometimes I'll make a color decision or change things too, you know, if I find a particular piece that can make it work. So,
for instance, the bowls might have started red. Is that as far as?
Well, I don't know if I would go so far as to go like extreme color that way, but like, I mean, these bowls were a very particular mustard that, you know, the more and more I layered mustard paper, it was like, that's just not interesting. I need to push that a little bit brighter in that spot. Or with the Beatles pieces, I designed those with the instruments in mind, but I had no idea what the backgrounds were going to be. And that was a really like, let's take all these pictures and put them together and see how crazy I can make this, but have it still coalescent to something. And that is very much a kind of making up the colors in the background as we go. So I make a lot of tonal value decisions in the moment based on the pieces I find. Because sometimes I find a piece that's just perfect. It's just not like this lifeless photo I'm working from. So I'll use that, and then it might mean I have to alter something else to make it work.
When you're making tonal decisions, is your eye trained well enough that you just make those decisions in the moment as you're looking at it? Do you ever use technology to grayscale an image out so that you can assess the value relationships clearer?
I don't do that. No, I have. I truly believe that for any exercise, if you work for 16 years on it, there are things that intuitively you come to understand about that material.
Yeah.
Sculptors talk about material all the time, right? It's all about getting to know the material and how it behaves and how far you can push it before it doesn't work. And I've noticed some weird things as a result of working on this for long enough that my hunch is 95% of the time going to be totally right. Like and if it's not, I know that I can do these other things to make that piece work. Probably the weirdest thing, this is so arrogant, I'm so sorry. I'm all humility
delicious.
aside.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's what we do.
Just
this
trying
for.
to let you into my brain. But no, I can largely now, oftentimes I have to cut a highly specific shape. So specific that I know I will obsess forever, but it is to the point where if I have my little cutting board and my X-Acto knife, I can kind of look at a shape, and then if I can do it quickly over here, I can usually get it, or at least get it very, very close.
You're drawing with the knife.
Yeah, I can usually approximate that shape without, whereas in the early days, these ones that now look, much simpler to me took me much longer to do because I just didn't have the muscle memory to know how to do it. So practice, it makes perfect. It's every piece I do, the aim is just to get it done and then learn from it and have that inform the next piece. That's the process of being an artist.
Good stuff. Let's open up to questions.
I probably have enough questions to last an hour, but I haven't had a chance to come up and look really close, so I have to do that. But like for the chair, the similar, did you actually weave that in and out?
That particular one, no. I don't think I have ever, I actually toyed with that idea of weaving of the paper because you could actually treat it that way.
But you had the same material, the same material that you use for each one.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's no. It's really the way to think about it would be that it's a very complex jigsaw puzzle where I kind of cut out all the pieces separately and then put them on there.
And then how about the decals on the bowls?
So sometimes when I have a very specific shape that way, and it's the tricky part with that is that the shadows go through the bowls too, right? Yeah. So I actually. The trick, this is like a magician giving up secrets here, but you use a piece of tracing paper, draw out the shape, put the paper I'm cutting out with the tracing paper over the top, and then cut through both.
Okay.
Yeah, and then put that there, which is something that I did for the designs on those bowls. And it's such a specific design, you got to get that right.
And then the other thing, how overlap, how much material do you overlap from one to the other? I don't understand.
Yeah,
that.
There's a lot of overlap. And like I was saying before, the whole process is kind of trial and error. I've found that if I'm trying to find the perfect piece, I will never find it. I'll sit there all night long, for hours and then think, oh no, it's 1 a.m. and I may put 2 pieces down. And so, the way around that is if I find a piece that might work, I'll cut that out and put that down. And then knowing that I might go over it or I might cut a smaller and smaller piece.
Okay.
I wish there were ways to make it archival without having to cover it and ways to protect it and still allow people to come up and feel it because they're actually very tactile. And one of the coolest things to do when they're done is just to kind of rub your hands over it and feel all these different layers of process going into it. it wouldn't be very good for the art. But it's that's very much what it is. So yeah, there are levels of precision. Sometimes it's quite loose, and sometimes it's quite tight. And sometimes I will tear the paper, because tearing the edge gives you a very specific look. If you tear the back side, you're going to get whatever's printed on the back. So if it's white on the back, you'll get a little white ridge. And then most of the time, though, for the precise stuff, I use an X-Acto knife to get a
Do you
very
ever
specific
find
cut.
you have to fill in with paint a little bit, or is that a sin?
I don't find that I have to do that, because I really do try to layer it kind of from larger pieces to smaller, and yeah. So there's no paint or drawing involved, so yeah.
I went through the experience of first thinking, oh, look, this painter has got some really interesting stuff. Oh, wait a minute. No, that's ads. Ads can't be that large. I cycled through about 7 or 8 things, and Jeannie comes up and says, look really closely. And it's quite fascinating.
Oh, thank you.
The question that I have is, when you put it into the computer, how much detail are you putting into the computer? Because there's probably 10,000 pieces on some of these things.
Yeah. No, it can be pretty loose in the computer. I'm thinking mainly in the computer of sort of the formal compositional layout.
So the shape of shapes
things,
kind
the
of
shape
thing.
of things, yeah. And
Yeah.
sometimes, I mean, the tricky thing is if you're looking for, sometimes you can find a picture of an old chair that's a high resolution, good photo. Most of the time you can't. Most of the time it's a grainy photo that somebody else has taken and been uploaded, and it's, a super terrible thing. But I know that if I can get the composition worked out, I can do some of the detail and the precision.
Right.
So sometimes the details, are extremely important. The bowls being an example of that, or certainly some of the guitars and the car parts. There are people who. That's one of the fascinating things to me about cars, is just how you can see the shape of a bumper or the shape of some chrome, and immediately kind of what it is, right?
Yeah.
It's a fascination I have with the designed object of the car, as much as anything. And I love the idea that you could cut a shape, and somehow it can immediately bring back memories for people.
So I want to clarify, did you give us permission to actually put our hands on these?
Well, you
was
can.
that, stop, don't do that.
Nathan might have. I did not. I got my eye on you.
Yeah.
I will say this would feel smooth if you felt it and you would just put your fingerprints all over it, because I've done this resin pour, which is what I've done with the newer ones here, the ones that break the frame, which is kind of a scary thing to do if you've ever done the resin. You mix up this chemical and you pour it on there, and then it has all these little bubbles in it. And the only way to get the bubbles out, if you don't have a vacuum chamber, is to hit it with a blowtorch. So, and there's a split second where if you hold it for too long, it can sizzle boil it. To make a collage and then pour an irreversible sticky substance all over it and then hit it with a blowtorch is a little bit dicey, but that's what you got to do to make them archival like that.
How do you, when you create the vessel into which you're going to pour the resin?
Yeah.
Is it that shape, or do you somehow trim it
No,
after the fact?
I put plastic all over the floor in the basement.
Yep.
And level it out, and you just let it drip over the sides, and you put a piece of painter's tape around the back.
Got it.
So that after the resin dries, you get these big drips. You can just pull the tape off, and you don't get the drips on the back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome work.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, since nobody else wants a microphone, when you were describing your working style, are you familiar with Adam Savage at all?
Yes, yeah, from Mythbusters.
And yeah, exactly. And his perspective, I got something from him that perfectly describes my working environment, and that is visual cacophony with first order retrievability.
Yeah.
And it sounds like
that.
that's what you're doing. I don't know if you've come across him speaking about that.
Oh yeah. My son was obsessed with Mythbusters, so that's great. I think I've heard that quote before, but yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah, I've
Makes
actually
sense.
used that to organize my shop. What do I
Yeah.
need to have within arm's reach immediately?
Yeah.
Nathan, thank you for your work. This is
Yeah.
just beautiful, and learning about it from you has been fantastic. They're titled, if I remember correctly, Deviations. So my wondering is deviations from what?
Yeah. It's a great question. So in this show, I have pieces like this one, which are on paper in a rectangular or square frame. All but the last couple years, all of my pieces were on paper, and they were all taken over to the frame shop, and put behind museum glass, which is expensive. And the change I wanted to make, which you can see in this show, is that I wanted to try to bust out of that frame somehow. I wanted to try to get past the rectangular frame. Again, I really do believe all ideas have kind of been thought of or being explored by other people, and I know there are amazing people who do this. I have yet to see people who've kind of done exactly this, and I'm sure, famous last words, I will now find some, and I hope I do. But I love the idea that it could, hover off the wall a little bit, and that it could, I could break that rule, right? And I guess the word deviation, I think of something sinister, like a breaking of the rule, right? If you're a deviant, that was just the word I chose on for that. And then I just enjoy, in the same way, putting together random objects that, to explore the kind of odd synapses we build in our brains when it comes to shared memory of things, to put deviation in. So this is deviation number 13 with Apollo capsule and Pyrex bowls. I think it's kind of funny. I wonder if anybody's ever written that sentence before.
I think you're right. I think that's unique.
I enjoy that. So
thank you.
Yeah.
That's great.
Kind of playing off that, do you ever have commissions where people want very specific vignette of objects that just don't work together? And what would you do in that situation?
Well, I probably wouldn't take the commission if I didn't feel it was something I could execute. I will say, a woman in Texas saw my work online and asked if I would do an original work, and I said, "What are you thinking?" And she's obsessed with John James Audubon. Like, if you don't know these are the absolutely gorgeous bird prints, right? These exquisitely precise, ornithological, is that the word?
Yeah.
Thank you, smart. Ornithological pictures of birds, with all the little feather details and everything. And she's like, I would just be fascinated to see if you applied this process to that, what would that look like? And so I was like, okay, I have no idea what will happen. Something very strange happened when I'm trying to, because you kind of can't help but have bits of commercial paper and ads and things like that in this thing, which is incredibly, if you've seen those images, they're very, they're incredibly precise but very still. And they're made in the, 1800s or something, so they don't, it feels odd to kind of pop culture-ize them, the pop art them in that way. But it created, again, the same effect of, like, if you walk by it from a distance, you would probably just think it's somebody's, made a repainting of an Audubon painting, Audubon bird. And then you get up close and, I found books on birds, and I found books on Texas where she's from, and I found bits on the little birds that were in the pictures, and I put some of those sentences in there, and it turned out to be really, really cool. And then she had me come and do the other one, which I mentioned earlier, the one where I had to layer on top because the resin didn't work. That was the second one I did for her. Bits of the sky kind of got all stained, and so I ended up kind of going back into it, which actually worked well because it's this big crane kind of flying. Anyway, they're on my website. You can check them out. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, there's so many things I'd be curious to try. I have yet to try a portrait, and there are people who do. Huge heads and things like that. So I'd be curious to know what that sounds like. At the same time, I know that would take me months and months of work to figure out. So who knows? Now that we have this show, maybe it's a good time to experiment a little bit and see, what could work and what couldn't. So I have to make it to see if it'll work.
When people see your art and your shows, do they speak a lot about kind of the emotional reaction to these recollections, or not so much?
Yeah, oftentimes the people who will come up to me are the people who have a very specific emotional memory based around a kitchen object. For a while, I made I have this little one of this fan here,
Yeah.
but I made a whole series of kettles, just different shaped kettles, and those really resonated with people, which is.
It's interesting, as kind of an aging person, I look at like that and I just see that in my mother's kitchen. And yet, in the last few years, I've been downsizing and getting rid of things like this, like that fan. So that's interesting, just how that's kind of bringing that up, letting go of these things, right?
Absolutely.
So thank you for bringing them back.
Oh, recollecting.
Yeah.
Nathan, thank you for sharing your work with our community.
You're very welcome.